Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vitorian, and this is the 25th Hour. In this week's news for the week of November 15th to 21, 2020, Mayor de Blasio has closed schools indefinitely in the face of a rising COVID wave, and businesses are going to be next. Governor Cuomo is set to receive an Emmy for his pandemic briefings while he continues to manage the statewide COVID response. And Trump is still trying to do everything he can to cast doubt on the presidential election result and make things difficult for Biden when he gets inaugurated at the end of January. A reminder that later this evening our interview with former president of the ACLU, Nadine Strossen, will be posted as well, so don't miss your chance to hear about how your First Amendment rights fare in the pandemic age. Now, on to the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with Mayor de Blasio. De Blasio left schools open on November 16th after all, but de Blasio decided to close the schools starting Thursday, citing the city crossing over a 3% average positive testing rate, making the students that were learning in person to use worksheet packets while they wait for their electronic devices.
And as a result, we do need to close our schools for the coming days. No one is happy about this decision. We all, in fact, are feeling very sad about this decision because so much good work has been put into keeping the schools opened and opening them up to begin with. Let's start there. Opening the schools when almost no other major school system in America opened, making them so safe. But we set a very clear standard, and we need to stick to that standard. And I want to emphasize to parents, to educators, to staff, to kids, that we intend to come back and come back as quickly as possible.
On the day schools closed, 140,000 students had no contact with their schools. Parents and students marched on Thursday to City Hall to deliver a petition demanding that schools reopen. About 3.4% of the roughly 1 million students that enrolled in public schools last year have switched to parochial or religious schools. 10,000 students have left public schools to be homeschooled altogether. Students in the city faced a deadline on Sunday on whether they were going with blended learning or not, but that seems to have been scrapped after schools closed. Most of the city students are learning via remote learning, with 800,000 kids logging into their devices, but with so much criticism on how kids are learning this way, there hasn't been a lot of planning for how to improve. Schools with the worst air ventilation problems may finally see a way to have a safe environment for their students, but after millions of dollars were spent to improve ventilation systems, it hasn't calmed down students, parents, or teachers. The city faced about a 2.5% positive testing rate at the start of the week. The mayor said that he is going to put a higher priority on testing students after schools reopen, which is still unclear when that will happen. If restaurants and gyms weren't concerned with closing down after the school shutdown was announced, Mayor de Blasio quickly poured cold water on that confidence when he said that it's not a matter of if, but when businesses close again.
First of all, I think from what the governor said yesterday, and the numbers certainly reflected, I don't think it's a if the city is going into an orange zone, it's a when the city's going into an orange zone. And again, I'm being very straightforward to all the folks. I've heard the comments about, how could indoor dining still be open in gyms? And I wish they could stay open. I really do, because I feel for the business owners. I feel for the people who have put their lives into building up a business. I feel for the people who care about those businesses. But Ruben, it's not if, it's when. And by any normal count, just looking at the state's own number system, we're talking a week or two before we're in that orange zone status. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the blunt truth.
De Blasio later clarified in an interview with WNYC that the timetable seems to be early December for other closures. Toilet paper, paper towels, and hand sanitizers, among other things, are disappearing in Staten Island as most of the borough had been declared a yellow zone. Citywide, apparently, the financial situation may be rosier considering the pandemic. New York has provided the city $840 million more in tax revenue than projected, according to the Office of Management and Budget. The money came from personal income taxes, general corporation taxes, and the city comptroller's office refinanced some bonds. A new survey showed that 42% of New Yorkers are experiencing food insecurity, meaning that New Yorkers are often running out of food or they're worried they will before they get more money. Despite contact tracing being a focal point in New York's response to COVID, it turns out that the program can't pinpoint 80% of cases, rendering it virtually useless. Half of Brooklyn's businesses couldn't pay rent in November, according to a survey by the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. According to a joint study by the CDC and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the majority of COVID mortalities in the city were concentrated in high-poverty communities of color or those who, in the older population, have underlying conditions. New Yorkers were still lining up for hours in front of city MDs, with one woman going viral for tweeting out how she was doing waiting for her COVID test. The city is starting to lose its grasp of how the virus is spreading, according to the New York Times. The NYPD has either reduced or rejected harsh penalties against officers about 71% of the time out of 6,900 misconduct charges that were substantiated by the Civilian Complaint Review Board, one of the oversight agencies for the NYPD. Police are continuing to break up illegal parties during the pandemic, with a recent underground 200-person party broken up in the Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan. A 200-person fight club was also broken up in the Bronx. Shootings in New York City nearly doubled to 95%, as arrests for serious crimes excluding burglaries, car thefts, and gun crimes have fallen by 13%, continuing a trend that politicians and activists have called serious attention to. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea says that officers are making progress in gun arrests. De Blasio gave a rare criticism against the NYPD in its use of administrative subpoenas and getting companies to release information in investigations, specifically about data that revolve around officers and private citizens, saying that he was concerned and that he was going to look into it right away. The city's hospitals will end the policy of drug testing pregnant patients without their written consent after outcries that the practice leads to unnecessary investigations in the child welfare system. Toxicology tests now require informed written consent on the part of the mother. The City Commission on Human Rights is launching an investigation into 3 public hospitals and whether their drug tests led to racial disparities in the child welfare system. Before the pandemic, there was a plan to pass congestion pricing, which places a sort of toll for driving in Manhattan below 60th Street. The pandemic threw a wrench in those plans, with transportation experts urging the MTA to not move forward. The MTA will lose $1 billion without implementing that congestion pricing plan. The MTA also estimated that almost 14% of subway riders jumped the turnstiles between July and September, with the agency missing out on about $38 million in revenue as a result. The Department of Transportation has taken point in proposing regulations on outdoor setups being constructed by restaurants in response to colder temperatures and a lack of indoor dining being allowed, requiring dining locations to use certain building materials for safety purposes and allowing the setups to be portable for when snowplows come remove snow from the streets in the winter. The MTA is getting ready to borrow almost $3 billion from the Federal Reserve to stay afloat, in the midst of having to slash weekday service in half and cut over 9,000 jobs in its next budget proposal. Meanwhile, Port Authority employees are coming down with COVID ahead of the busy holiday season, with 68 workers testing positive in the last month. Mayor de Blasio announced on Friday a nearly $9 million redesign of Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn, refurbishing the Arch, famously located in the area, and a restoration of the grounds surrounding the monument. New York City and Company, the city's tourism agency, released a report saying that even with a future vaccine being released, the Big Apple's tourist levels won't instantly recover to pre-pandemic times until 2025. Tourism will have dropped 66% by the end of the year, according to the agency. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, as part of his plan on what he would do if he was elected mayor after next year's election, said that he wants to make New York City more efficient by hiring an efficiency czar and consolidating city data to better connect New Yorkers to city services. Adams officially announced his candidacy for mayor through a video, saying he raised $2.6 million.
We have to fix government and eliminate the inefficiencies that are holding us back. But we're New Yorkers. We respond, we take action, and with the right leadership, we will rise up again.
Adams announcing his run for mayor in a video posted to his YouTube channel overnight. In it, he blames the pandemic, rising crime rates, and systemic racism for what he calls, quote, a crisis unlike one the city has ever seen before. And he tells the story of his own experience with police brutality as a teenager. Adams served for more than 20 years in the NYPD before winning a state Senate seat back in 2006 and being elected Brooklyn Borough President in 2013.
Adams controversially continued to raise money by bringing a crowd of people together into an indoor restaurant, telling donors after his stump speech that they're allowed to pull down their masks only when they're going for a bite to eat, placing himself in a weird position for a candidate stressing public health.
So there's food left. Please eat. You have when you put the fork in your mouth, you have permission to take your mask down and put your fork in your mouth. Those are the rules.
Adams' deputy borough president also got in trouble this week for attending a party where there weren't any strict COVID rules enforced. Coincidentally, shortly after Adams' announcement, mayoral hopeful and city comptroller Scott Stringer filed a lawsuit against de Blasio to force the mayor to turn over missing information about how the city was preparing for the pandemic. Questions are being asked about what outgoing Staten Island and Bay Ridge Congressman Max Rose is going to do now that he lost his election to Nicole Malliotakis. Yahoo News is reporting that Rose might himself jump into the mayoral race. Diane Morales, a nonprofit executive, also kicked off her mayoral campaign, trying to become the city's first Afro-Latina mayor. One thing is the same across the board. Everyone running for mayor doesn't want the current one's endorsement, and isn't even asking for it either. Voter turnout in New York City increased by 7.5% from the last presidential election, underscoring the importance of this year's elections in the minds of new and old voters alike. 2.25 million New Yorkers voted in person, and 1.1 million voted early, and 720,000 voted absentee. De Blasio signed a city council bill this week that expanded the city's regulations to cover carbon emissions coming out of 1,000 more buildings, reducing 190,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year by 130,000. The expansion is part of New York City's own Green New Deal plan, saying that buildings of 25,000 square feet or more have to become more energy efficient. Moving on to the City Council. Councilman Brad Lander, who represents Brooklyn's 39th district and is running for city comptroller, called for the NYPD to get out of traffic enforcement, pointing to a history of racial profiling and suggesting the Department of Transportation needs to take over. De Blasio rejected the idea, saying that it would be counterproductive and that Vision Zero, his goal to prevent pedestrian deaths, requires law enforcement. Manhattan City Councilman Ben Kalos introduced a bill that would make the Taxi and Limousine Commission create an app that would group Uber and yellow taxis together in order to create more competition within the struggling taxi industry. Kalos tried to introduce the same bill in 2014. We reported last week on a development project going on in Flushing, Queens, with a split in council support over the number of affordable housing units being built. Candidates that are running to replace outgoing Flushing Councilman Peter Koo are split on their own support for the development, ranging from John Cho, head of the Greater Flushing Chamber of Commerce, who opposes the development, to Nen Wang, the former director of the Chinese American Planning Council's Nanshan Senior Center, who would support it. Councilman Carlos Menchaca, who represents Red Hook and is running for mayor, was joined alongside Assemblyman Nick Perry, who represents Brownsville, calling for a change in NYPD protocols when it comes to covering polling sites, after a series of news stories pointing out how cops removed PPE from one poll site and threatening to arrest somebody else for wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt at another. Shikhar Krishnan, Queens activist and civil rights lawyer, announced his candidacy to replace outgoing 25th Councilmanic District Representative Daniel Drum, who, like most other council members, is term limited next year. Brooklyn Councilman Stephen Levin has introduced a bill in the council that would pay New Yorkers to report parking violators, including those who are abusing their parking placards. Much controversy has been paid to police officers and other city employees who use their official parking passes for their advantage, just to get a one-up on a parking spot, which we all know barely exists in New York City. Reporters under Levin's bill would get 25% of any fine an illegal parker would have to pay. Moving on to Governor Cuomo. Cuomo threatened legal action if the White House does not deploy the vaccine equitably, promising to mobilize an army to make sure black and brown New Yorkers have equal access to the vaccines.
The Trump administration's proposed plan is such an affront. I tell you today, if the Trump administration does not change this plan and does not provide an equitable vaccine process, we will enforce our legal rights. We will bring legal action to protect New Yorkers.
Cuomo also said that New York will need money to distribute the vaccine itself. Lewis County Sheriff Mike Carpinelli said he won't be enforcing a 10-person limit in people's homes on Thanksgiving that has been recently passed by Cuomo. Despite opposition from those who don't like the idea of Cuomo setting more limits, Cuomo said the virus wasn't an upstate or downstate issue and that New Yorkers should remain vigilant. State health officials are worried about there being a repeat of PPE shortages, much like there was in the beginning of the pandemic, with a third of New York physicians saying PPE access and affordability are issues getting in their way for caring for patients, according to a USA Today survey. Hospitalizations have surpassed 2,000 patients in the state. Pat Foy, the chairman of the MTA, defended his criticized hands-off approach in enforcing Cuomo's $50 mask fine, having only fined 10 passengers, citing that there isn't really much of a need to fine people due to such a high number of compliance. Cuomo said on Wednesday that New York City is heading for tighter restrictions, expecting a tremendous spike in cases after Thanksgiving. Nurses from Montefiore New Rochelle Hospital in New Rochelle, New York, gave management notice that they were going to strike if the hospital didn't guarantee safer conditions and PPE. What is sure to piss off a lot of people, Cuomo is going to receive an International Emmy Award for his COVID briefings at the outset of the pandemic. Why would it piss people off? While Cuomo is being lauded for his being present during the pandemic's effect on New York, the backdrop of so many people dying of the virus, including the deaths of so many in nursing homes, creates a cloud over Cuomo's head. Cuomo signed a bill last week that would require landlords to make repairs ordered by courts within 2 months, which was inspired by the death of 8-year-old Jashawn Parker 18 years ago, who perished in a fire after tenants complained about a lack of repairs for a long time. The state is sitting on $60 million in federal rent relief money 6 weeks before a deadline passes to spend the money or return the cash to the federal government. New York is going to offer a non-binary gender marker for driver's licenses in the state with the letter X, where gender is usually marked, but it'll take the state DMV about a year to automate the change. The National Rifle Association agreed with the Department of Financial Services that it would stay out of the insurance business and pay a $2.5 million fine in exchange for the department ending its investigation into the gun organization. The state wants to fine companies like Con Ed, Orange and Rockland, and Central Hudson due to their perceived inadequate response to the state's natural disasters, the most recent one being Tropical Storm Isaias earlier in the summer. 1.5 million customers were left without power into August, which angered not only New Yorkers, but the state regulators. Moving on to Albany. New York lawmakers hope that nursing home problems will be avoided in this second wave. Assemblyman Ron Kim from Queens said that the lack of corporate immunity on the part of nursing homes forces them to take proper precautions for COVID, unlike in the beginning of the outbreak. Despite a week passing since absentee ballots started being counted in New York, it'll still be some time before Republican Rob Astorino and Democrat Pete Harcum find out who won the race for the state Senate seat to represent Westchester. Democratic State Senator Andrew Granardis ended up winning re-election against former nightclub owner Republican Vito Bruno to represent Bay Ridge in the Albany chamber. Absentee ballots are what carried Granardis over the finishing line, as Bruno was ahead of him in the initial vote count. South Brooklyn Assemblywoman Matilda Frontis narrowly defeated QAnon sympathizer Mark Sherskowitz after catching up due to absentee ballots, which we reported last time was causing concern that Frontis was going to lose as Sherskowitz was running ahead of her in the physical count. Meanwhile, absentee ballot counting has stopped in Onondaga County after COVID exposure ran through ballot counters. The state Senate race between Republican Angie Rena and Democrat John Mannion and the Assembly race between Republican Mark Vineski and Democrat Al Stripe are still unsettled in that county. Long Island State Senator Democrat Kevin Parker declared victory over Republican challenger Dennis Dunn this week, delivering a win for state Democrats once absentee ballots pushed Parker over a 7,000-vote edge to get him another term in office. The other Long Island Democrat State Senator, James Cochran, beat his Republican challenger, Edmund Smith, winning a second term and ensuring both Long Island seats stayed in Democratic hands. The Commission on Legislative, Judicial, and Executive Compensation released its report this week on whether public officials should raise their pay for the next 4 years, concluding that they shouldn't, as they pointed to obvious indicators such as the pandemic and the state's financial distress. State lawmakers have the option to pass a law overturning the Commission's report, but Gannett Albany suggested that they wouldn't do such a thing. The one problem with the report is that it lets slide the fact that Governor Cuomo is allowed to have a $25,000 raise beginning in January due to a legislative measure passed in the spring of 2019, bringing Cuomo's salary to $250,000. Only the legislature has the power to override the pay increase. Cuomo, however, averted a political headache and said that he would defer his pay hike. Despite a state statute mandating a replacement within 30 days for any member of the Joint Commission on Public Ethics who leaves, Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie and Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins haven't done so for 2 years. The Commission, or JCOPE, is responsible for overseeing New York's ethics and lobbying regulations, but has also gone under fire for failing to do the very thing they're meant for. After the group met up, one of their topics of discussion was whether elected officials should have their outside income become more scrutinized. The first thing that came to mind was Cuomo's book deal, which the Cuomo appointees on JCOPE quickly voted down. Queens Assemblyman Ron Kim called on Governor Cuomo to release prisoners in New York who are at risk of getting infected with COVID. According to the Asian Pacific American Task Force, 1,644 inmates got infected, but only 5 have been released on medical parole since March 16th. Moving on to the state courts, subpoenas were sent out by both the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, and the State Attorney General, Letitia James, leading criminal and civil investigations, respectively, into the Trump Organization, focusing on tax write-offs associated with consulting fees that may have went to Ivanka. Last week, the Office of Court Administration announced a pause on jury trials. Now, the OCA included bench trials and hearings will be halted from happening in person, being pushed to virtual hearings as more court staff are receiving positive COVID test results. The New York Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, ruled in a split decision that a criminal defendant couldn't suppress evidence acquired by police after they were stopped for having a faulty brake light, despite the officer having been mistaken about the traffic law. 3 justices in an unsigned memo said that the cops' reasonable mistake of the law did not preclude there being an objective violation of the state's traffic laws, and thus there was probable cause for the stop. 2 judges dissented, throwing cold water on the officer actually complying with the state traffic law. A state judge ruled this week that a community group put together by concerned Upper West Side residents doesn't actually have a say in the city's decision whether to remove homeless men or not from the Lucerne Hotel, pointing to a lack of precedent. Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Deborah James denied lawyer Randy Mastro's request for his client to be heard in a hearing deciding whether homeless single men should be moved from the Lucerne Hotel to the Wall Street Radisson Hotel. In the lawsuit brought by older judges against the Office of Court Administration for cutting the older judges in response to pandemic budget cuts, the judges that were fired asked the court to hold court officials and Chief Judge Janet DeFiore in contempt for not appearing. The judge later on in the week refused to hold them in contempt. DeFiore rebuked the judges in question and defended cutting them from the judiciary by saying that, quote, while criticism and disagreement on how to deal with reductions is expected, it is profoundly disappointing to receive a letter from a sitting judge on behalf of a respected association of judges that repeatedly attacks our motives as biased. She later writes, quote, I frankly expected better of you and the organization. The New York City Law Department sued Brooklyn landlords for allegedly evicting tenants personally during the pandemic, not going through the housing courts as they are legally obligated to. Despite tenants saying they have no money due to losing their jobs, landlords allegedly still demanded money. A female prosecutor from the Bronx DA's office filed a $2.5 million lawsuit against the office, alleging that the Bronx prosecutorial office is rife with sexual harassment, and that her supervisor showed her pictures of a defendant's penis, commented about her breasts, and a bunch of other disgusting things. The Bronx DA's office did not respond to the New York Post for comment. The Archdiocese of New York sued New York City in order to gain access to free COVID tests at Catholic schools under what they claim is a state law requirement, as more students signed up following their exit from public schools. Moving on to Trump. President Trump tweeted something as close to an admission about him losing the election as possible, saying that Biden's win is due to a rigged election. He also confusingly tweeted out that he won the election after all, which Twitter was quick to place a fact check on. Trump's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, vowed that there will be a professional transition of power to Biden, but still made it seem like Trump can win a second term through his electoral lawsuits. In Michigan's Wayne County, there was an uproar when the bipartisan certification committee was deadlocked 2-2 to agree to certify the election results, with Republicans pointing out a mismatch between the number of people who signed in to vote in person and the actual number of votes. As we all know, the number of people who physically voted was less this time around due to an uptick in mail-in ballots because, as we all know, a pandemic is happening and people were afraid of getting sick and dying. The Republicans later agreed to certify the results after agreeing to a compromise with Democrats under the condition that the Michigan Secretary of State audit the out-of-balance numbers. After all was said and done, a member of the Wayne County Certification Committee still wanted to rescind their vote in the end, but it was too late. It later turned out that Trump called Republican Michigan lawmakers and invited them to the White House. The only thing that amounted to, after the meeting, were the lawmakers saying that they have no information that would overturn the certification in Biden's favor, and that they will honor the state's vote. Trump's campaign is also requesting a recount in Wisconsin despite the 20,000 vote discrepancy and having to pay $3 million to the state to do the recount. Georgia completed its hand recount, and surprise, Biden still won, with the Associated Press finally giving Biden the Electoral College votes. Biden ended up ahead of Trump in Georgia by almost 12,300 votes. Trump's campaign is running out of time in order to mount any sort of successful electoral lawsuit, as states certify their results starting Monday night. The Million MAGA March occurred this past weekend, trying to replicate the Women's March that occurred after Trump won in 2016, but the crowds were excessively tiny this time around. Trump's press secretary Kayleigh McEnany tried to paint a different picture, however, saying that 1 million people marched when in reality it was close to tens of thousands, in an episode that resembled when Trump's first press secretary, Sean Spicer, tried asserting that Trump's inauguration crowd vastly outsized Obama's, which was absolutely not true. The future seems cloudy for Trump after he leaves the White House at the end of January. Some say that he will be launching his own TV network, others say that he will run again in 2024, and then some experts say that without the presidential protections of immunity, his Twitter feed and his own freedom away from jail will be long gone. However, as presidents usually get portraits in libraries after the time is done, Trump might get his own Trump Center. Facebook announced it removed 265,000 pieces of content on its Facebook and Instagram platforms for violating voter interference policies. In a speech this week, Biden said that lockdowns would be a last resort to combating COVID, but that everyone has to work together to beat back the newest wave of infections. Biden also said that many people will die if Trump doesn't coordinate a more effective virus response.
What do you see as the biggest threat to your transition right now, given President Trump's unprecedented attempt to obstruct and delay a smooth transfer of power?
More people may die if we don't coordinate. If we have to wait until January 20th to start that planning, it puts us behind over a month and a half.
Political's Brian Failer posited this week whether Biden's IRS would give House Democratic committees Trump's tax returns for their investigations, but it might backfire politically on Democrats. Biden himself reportedly doesn't want to be bogged down in Trump investigations, saying that he wants the country to move on and heal, despite saying early in the campaign he wouldn't pardon Trump if he's implicated in federal crimes. No matter what, Biden can't interfere with state prosecutions against Trump, and Trump can't pardon himself for those state crimes. Attention is being paid on who else Biden is putting on his team, including his campaign manager, Jen O'Malley, becoming the new deputy chief of staff, and Cedric Richmond resigning his House seat to become Biden's chair in the Office of Public Engagement. Biden also named Dana Remus, who clerked for conservative Justice Samuel Alito, as counsel to the president. Remus was also general counsel of the Obama administration. Steve Ricchetti, Biden's aide, who has served in a multitude of roles for the former VP, had been tapped as the president-elect's advisor. Mike Donnellan was also named as a senior advisor. Donnellan recently took point on Biden's campaign message. In what might seem to be a last laugh for Obama's failed Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland, NPR reported, is being considered as a candidate to be Biden's attorney general. While Biden tamps down speculation that his transition is going to sue Trump's administration from blocking the transition's work, Biden is fundraising to make up the lack of public funding that a new presidential transition would receive otherwise. Biden, in a series of appearances, also said that he wouldn't be pushing for a national business shutdown or mask mandate throughout the country. Normally, the president-elect would start being briefed by the National Security Council on national security threats. However, because Trump's administration is not ascertaining that Biden won the election, Biden has to resort to using retired Army generals and national security experts from outside the federal government to start getting briefed on national security matters. A week after Pfizer announced its COVID vaccine being 90% effective, news came out this week that Moderna's early data showed its vaccine being almost 95% effective, leading to a race for a vaccine. Stocks jumped after the news broke, with investors hopeful for a return to normal in the near future. And then Pfizer said, you know what? Never mind. Our vaccine is actually 95% effective too, and announced it'll seek emergency authorization from the FDA. Scott Atlas, Trump's public health advisor who doesn't have experience with infectious diseases, urged people to rise up, his quote, against COVID restrictions on Twitter this week. An investigation by the Wall Street Journal revealed that about 300 companies that received about $500 million in Paycheck Protection Program funding ended up failing anyway, laying off about 23,400 workers, underscoring the amount of relief needed not just for companies but for everyday workers around the country. Infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said in an interview that he preferred a uniform federal virus strategy rather than a disjointed state-by-state approach, another point of contention between Fauci and Trump's approach to the pandemic. Dr. Fauci also said that the average American could get vaccinated as soon as April. The Food and Drug Administration authorized the first at-home COVID test developed by Lucira Health, which needs a prescription and costs $50. People can do a nasal swab at home and ship the specimen to labs to await a result. Trump's administration promised states they'll have enough hospital beds and equipment, but is otherwise not doing anything to back up its promises. The CDC warned Americans this week not to travel for Thanksgiving in the midst of rising infection numbers, and in the face of many Americans starting to really ignore recommendations because of pandemic fatigue. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin refused to extend the emergency loan program started by the Federal Reserve that are set to end on December 31st. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said that he doesn't think the program should expire and is generally in favor of government stimulus to prop up the economy during this time. The weekly Department of Labor report showed that U.S. jobless claims rose to 742,000, an increase of more than 30,000 people, a sign that new waves of the virus spreading through the states is reinfecting the economy as well. Millions of people are set to lose their jobless benefits at the end of December, as Congress already left for break and hasn't passed a new replacement benefits bill. The icing on the cake is that government programs are set to run out on December 11th as a result of a continuing resolution signed by Trump, and Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, said he couldn't guarantee that the government will avert a government shutdown once funding runs out. A few weeks ago, Mexico's former defense minister was arrested in LA on drug trafficking and corruption charges, leading to peaked attention about the highest Mexican official being charged in the war on drugs. Since then, the DOJ has decided to in fact drop the charges after Mexico offered to investigate him themselves. Reporting came out later in the week that revealed that actually, Mexico threatened to expel American agents working in the country if General Zepeda wasn't released. Jay Clayton, chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, said he will step down at the end of the year after having served 3.5 years under President Trump. The SEC also announced they would pursue a plan to require that Chinese firms use U.S. overseen auditors to address unfair treatment by Chinese companies. Trump's administration is moving forward with selling leases to oil companies to drill in Alaska's Arctic Sanctuary, one of the last untouched federal lands in the U.S., only creating more administrative headaches for future President Biden, who is almost certainly set to cancel those leases. Separately, the U.S.'s greenhouse gas emissions are set to drop to the lowest level in 30 years, lowering 9.2% this year since less people are emitting pollution during the pandemic. Meanwhile, Andrew Wheeler, the chair of the EPA, is set to visit Taiwan, the autonomous region of China that claims independence, in December, the third high-ranking official from the U.S. to visit. The Federal Aviation Authority has cleared the Boeing 737 to fly again after a series of crashes and reports that Boeing took shortcuts in the 737's manufacturing. Boeing was forced to ground a fleet of planes last March after crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia killed 346 people. NBC News released a report that showed how the White House blocked a program that would pay for mental health care for those who were separated as a result of Trump's immigration policies, with senior advisor Stephen Miller, known for his hardline anti-immigration advocacy, winning the debate over whether to fund the initiative. The administration also revived talks of ending birthright citizenship, the right for those born on American soil to be considered automatic American citizens, with the plan being to pass an executive order outlawing the practice before Biden takes office. After a series of job removals at the Pentagon, rumors spread that Trump was trying to speed up the timeline to withdraw troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. The Associated Press's Lauren Cook reported that NATO leaders Jens Stoltenberg spoke to the acting defense secretary Christopher Miller, with Miller assuring Stoltenberg that the U.S. was committed to staying in Afghanistan for as long as necessary. The Wall Street Journal then reported that plans were in fact being drawn up to withdraw troops from both Iraq and Afghanistan, drawing down troops to about 2,500 by January 15th. Trump also moved forward with his firing of Christopher Krebs, the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity chief, because Krebs refused to say that the election was filled with fraud, and instead said that this election was the most secure in American history. Trump had reportedly asked DHS Acting Secretary Chad Wolf to fire Krebs, but Wolf refused to do so. The Pentagon separately said it shot down an unarmed missile over the sea in a test to measure its missile interception capabilities. The New York Times filed a report claiming that Trump sought options to attack Iran to put a stop to the country's growing nuclear program. Sources told the Times that advisors dissuaded Trump from following that plan. To say the least, the proposed attack would have made things very difficult to reinstate the U.S. into the Iranian nuclear agreement that Obama ratified in 2015, and would have also violated Trump's electoral promises not to enter into another American war. Secretary of State Pompeo is in the midst of his last-minute seven-nation tour, catching attention for visiting Turkey but without meeting any of its government officials, including Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Pompeo visited Israel afterwards. He became the highest-level U.S. official to visit the West Bank and called the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction Group, BDS, anti-Semitic. BDS advocates for placing an economic blockade on Israel for its treatment against Palestinians. Pompeo also made noise while visiting the West Bank by saying that the occupied zone is actually a part of Israel, when in fact it's not internationally recognized as Israeli land and is under Palestinian sovereignty. The U.S. executed its 8th federal inmate ever since Attorney General Bill Barr reversed a federal policy preventing carrying out the death penalty. Orlando Hall was convicted of the rape and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Texas and was executed by lethal injection on Thursday. The Census Bureau told the Commerce Department that it can't complete the counts of state populations in time before Trump leaves office in January, throwing a wrench in Trump's plan to exclude the count of undocumented immigrants in the country before Congress reapportions its districts. Census Director Stephen Dillingham didn't rule out submitting the official count before Trump leaves. Moving on to Congress and starting in the House. All eyes will be on who the parties in the House pick as their new leadership teams. Pelosi and McCarthy were reelected to lead the Democrats and Republicans respectively in the House. Pelosi reaffirmed her promise to not run again as Speaker after this next session of Congress. Democrats Hoyer and Clyburn were reelected and retained their spots as Majority Leader and Whip respectively. The one change that brought attention was Rep. Catherine Clark winning a post as Assistant Speaker. The House launched a new COVID testing program, although the testing won't be mandatory. There are plenty of complaints from fellow congressmen that their colleagues aren't wearing masks inside the chambers. The central New York House race between Democrat Anthony Brindisi and Republican Claudia Tenney has gone to court, as the margin between the two challengers is around 100 votes. A judge is likely to decide the race in the coming days or weeks. Democratic Representative Tom Suozzi declared victory against his Republican opponent George Santos in the race for the 3rd Congressional District covering the North Shore of Long Island. Republican Kevin Vanderwater conceded to Democrat Antonio Delgado in New York's 19th Congressional District and said that he plans another run in 2022. The good times might slow down for Congresswoman-elect Nicole Malliotakis of Staten Island, as her campaign was fined almost $27,000 for campaign finance violations stemming from her mayoral run 3 years ago and failing to report transactions. Republicans are keeping their Long Island congressional seat with the victory of Assemblyman Andrew Garbarino, replacing outgoing Representative Peter King. Nita Lowey and Carolyn Maloney, chairs of the Appropriations and Oversight Committees respectively, called on the head of the General Services Administration, Emily Murphy, to brief the House of Representatives on why she hasn't ascertained that Biden won the election, a legal term of art that would authorize Biden's team to receive federal funds and office space to begin the necessary work of getting ready to take over from Donald Trump. Murphy hasn't explained why she hasn't ascertained Biden's victory, but signs point to orders from the top. Murphy has also started to reach out to her associates looking for a job once she leaves the administration, and saying that the reason why she hasn't ascertained the victory for Biden is because she doesn't want to violate her loyalty to President Trump despite an oath taken by federal employees to follow the Constitution. The chairs of the House Budget Committee, House Oversight Committee, and House Appropriations Committees released documents that showed the White House Office of Management and Budget delayed funds meant for the World Health Organization around the time when Trump unilaterally declared America's withdrawal from the international public health body. The White House said the money was spent despite the delay, downplaying a tactic the White House used when it came to Ukraine, which led to Trump's impeachment. Moving on to the Senate, the competition tied to the Senate runoffs in Georgia on January 5th are in full swing. Democrats have a long track record of losing runoffs in the state, and they don't have a lot going in their favor without Trump being on the ballot this time. John Ossoff, running against David Perdue, would have to overcome almost a 90,000 vote deficit. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has started to turn his sights against the Republicans that have been bashing him, coming out with news this week saying that South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has allegedly hinted at throwing out some legal ballots cast for Biden to give Trump an edge.
Well, when Senator Graham called, I just assumed that he was calling about the two runoffs for the senators, so I called him back. And then during our discussion, he asked if ballots could be matched back to the envelope, the absentee ballots could be matched back to the envelope. I explained our process after it went through two sets of signature match. At that point, they were separated. But then Senator Graham applied for us to audit the envelopes and then throw out the ballots for counties who had the highest frequency error of signatures. And that I tried to, help explain that that's because we did signature match, you couldn't tie the signatures back anymore, to those ballots. Just like with if you voted in person, my name is not on my ballot, and so it can't be tied back to me. It's really something that's been around for over 100 years, the secret ballot.
This is a very serious accusation. He says you guys had a pleasant conversation, calls it very nice, and says if you have a problem with it, that's on you. Was there a moment in the call where you said, I'm sorry, Mr. Senator, but what you're asking me to do or suggesting I should do is not up to me and is not right morally, legally, or otherwise?
I really just got off the call and I said I would circle back, and I talked to counsel and I get back to him. And we just decided the best action was not to, get back and re-engage.
Senator Graham denied the charge, but Raffensperger said he had witnesses on the call. Graham was also apparently not the only out-of-state official trying to influence the election in Georgia. Vice President Mike Pence returned to the campaign, going to bat for the two Republican Georgian senators as well. Texas Senator Ted Cruz called his colleague Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown an ass for asking senators to wear masks while in the Senate chamber. Imagine that. Chuck Grassley, the Republican senator from Iowa, who is 87 years old, served in office since 1981, and serves as the senator pro tempore, the third in line to the presidency after the VP and Speaker of the House, has confirmed that he has coronavirus. Grassley attended a Republican leadership conference on Monday, leading to questions as to who was with him in the room. Since then, Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott has also tested positive for coronavirus. And ever since that came out, it also turns out that Donald Trump's son, Don Jr., has also tested positive for coronavirus. Former New York Senator Al D'Amato is being hospitalized for COVID as well and said that he feels weak, has a light fever, and is experiencing congestion, but otherwise feels good. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Rob Portman, also of Ohio, revealed that he had enrolled in a COVID vaccine trial, hoping to lower the temperature when it comes to opposition against masks as vaccines. On Tuesday, the Senate rejected Trump's nomination of Judy Shelton to head the Federal Reserve due to both opposition and absence of GOP lawmakers. Shelton is a controversial figure for her support to tie the dollar's value to gold and undervaluing the Fed's role as an independent agency, theoretically free of political independence, something President Trump didn't care for either. Senate Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell promised reporters that there will be an orderly transfer, which is an inch towards accepting the results of the presidential election. Other Senate GOP members like Lindsey Graham are still entertaining the idea that Trump can reverse the results through his lawsuits. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was in trouble this week for allegations that he is using his sister's Missouri residence officially while owning a home in Virginia, where he spends most of his time with his family. Hawley's office didn't comment on the discrepancy, but instead attacked the newspaper that brought up the claims. Moving on to the judicial branch. New York State courts aren't the only court systems ending jury trials amidst another COVID wave. Law.com reports that 25 federal courts in 21 states are quitting jury trials again, including in Texas, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland. Trump's legal avenues concerning the election continue to close. In Pennsylvania, Trump's legal operation dramatically scaled back its lawsuits, dropping legal claims about the number of observers who were allowed to witness vote counting, focusing instead on mail-in ballots. Assuming Trump's legal claims succeed, the number of votes they would overturn would come nothing close to Biden's lead. Trump's team kept changing, with lawyers resigning left and right, with the only ones left being Rudy Giuliani and conservative talk show host Mark Scaringi trying the case. As soon as Giuliani opened up for the Trump legal team in the Pennsylvania case concerning how many observers were allowed to witness vote counting, Giuliani said, quote, "This isn't a fraud case," and also messed up the legal standard he was supposed to argue in Trump's favor. In a separate case, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rejected Trump's argument that problems with ballot observers amounted to fraud, saying that the county elections board had sound rules about observers, that observers weren't blocked, and that it hasn't caused fraud. Not to be deterred, Giuliani asked a federal judge to get rid of the results in Pennsylvania and declared Trump the victor, this time reasserting claims that observers were blocked from vote counts. All of this coming on the heels of Giuliani reportedly seeking $20,000 a day for representing the president. Election lawsuits had been dropped in 3 other states, namely Michigan, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Giuliani held a meandering press conference on Thursday, pressing false claims of fraud without evidence, and at one point what seemed to be Giuliani's hair dye started rolling down the side of his head. Yes, that was important for you to know. A federal complaint filed this week claims that New York City elite high schools screen out black and brown students. Teens Take Charge sued the Department of Education, claiming that the method the high schools use, including examining grades, test scores, attendance, and among other things, causes a discriminatory effect despite appearing neutral on its face. As states, including New York, instituted restrictions on houses of worship amidst the pandemic, courts have sided mostly with states on their power to regulate in times of public health emergencies. Now, one case in particular with the Roman Catholic Diocese asked for Supreme Court intervention against Governor Cuomo. The last time the court ruled on these types of restrictions, Chief Justice Roberts sided with the liberals to uphold rules against churches. A federal grand jury was convened in Buffalo to hear about investigations into activities that happened in Buffalo City Hall, including a $12 million housing project and other firms doing business with Mayor Byron Brown. A new case in Manhattan federal court was filed alleging that prison guards in Rikers ran a scheme called the Wool Tour, where violent inmates would be used to beat up on insubordinate prisoners, invoking images in films where guards pretend not to see inmates attacking each other. The lawsuit claims that guards would move around prisoners they didn't like to housing units that the guards knew would make those prisoners vulnerable to assaults and thefts. The law department said it's reviewing the lawsuit. Judge Nicholas Garofis from the Southern District Court ruled that acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf was incorrectly installed, leading to his actions concerning blocking DACA applications to become invalidated. The effect of the ruling might become worthless, with an incoming Biden administration supporting DACA anyway. A former Green Beret, which is a member of the U.S. Special Forces, admitted to spying for Russia and conspiring with Russian intelligence officers for more than a decade and providing them classified information. Peter Raphael Zabinski-Dubbins failed a polygraph test, was arrested, and is charged with espionage, facing the maximum amount of time in prison. D.C. trial court Judge Emmett Sullivan, you might recall he's the judge in the middle of the Michael Flynn case, ordered the Department of Homeland Security to stop deporting unaccompanied migrant children amidst the CDC policy that sped up deportations due to the pandemic. The logic is that because migrants from other countries might be sick with COVID, the country can deport them faster by passing due process. The court certified the children as a class and enjoined DHS from deporting them. As we reported earlier, the federal government executed an inmate named Orlando Hall, but the same day, a federal judge stayed the execution of a female inmate who would have been the first woman executed by the federal government in almost 60 years. In national news, Former President Barack Obama released a new memoir titled A Promised Land, recounting the remainder of his second term and the time afterwards, including Trump's presidency. In a conversation with The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg, Obama was very cognizant about the total shift in Republican attitudes in response to his presidency. The former president also ruled out a position in the incoming Biden administration, saying his wife Michelle would kill him. 250,000 people have died in the U.S. from COVID, a grim milestone showing how the country just keeps hitting new deadly numbers. Experts predict 100 to 200,000 more deaths in the coming months. States are announcing new restrictions in response to another wave of COVID, hitting people severely. With 11 million cases and now approaching 12 million in the U.S., states such as Michigan, California, Washington, and more set curfews, closures, and limits on private gatherings. Tyson Foods, the company known for being responsible for much of the country's meatpacking, is under the spotlight for wrongful death allegations after reports came out alleging managers bet money on how many workers would contract COVID. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan was originally hailed for ordering almost $9.5 million in South Korean COVID tests when the federal government refused to disperse enough tests. But it turned out the first batch of tests were flawed and were never used. Another hurricane that formed in the Atlantic, Iota, is raging through Honduras. Storm watchers are monitoring the storm, with this year breaking records for the number of serious hurricanes forming in one storm season. Elon Musk's rocket company SpaceX made history by launching its second crew to the International Space Station, sending 4 astronauts to the cosmos. The Boy Scouts have been hit with almost 83,000 sexual abuse claims before a deadline was reached in Delaware bankruptcy court as the National Scouting Organization announced insolvency. The Boy Scouts promised to set up a National Victims Compensation Fund in response to the abuse claims. Hate crime killings have reached a new record in 2019 to 51 killings, according to the FBI, spurred by a mass killing at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Killings against Jews raised the most, rising by 14%. Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old that gunned down and killed 2 people following the riots after the shooting of Jacob Blake, has posted his $2 million bail and is no longer in custody. Rittenhouse revealed in an interview with the Washington Post while he was still in custody this week that he used his COVID stimulus check to buy the AR-15 that he used to kill 2 people. Cincinnati Councilman P.G. Sittenfield was arrested on federal corruption charges this week, with the FBI saying he accepted bribes in exchange for votes on development deals. Sittenfield was the frontrunner in the city's mayoral race, but is also now the third person arrested in the city's legislature. That's it for this week's show on the 25th Hour, helping you beat the 24/7 news cycle every Sunday afternoon. Rate, subscribe, and share this podcast to your friends, and don't forget to become a patron today at patreon.com/the25thhournews. As always, you can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com. Follow us on most of your social media platforms and spread New York City's soon-to-be top-rated political podcast. Have a great weekend.